Okay, Dr. Dane, hello.
Good afternoon. So we started recording now. Good morning, actually, everyone. Today we have Dr. Edwin Garces with us. He's gonna present his work on evaluating R&D projects in regulated utilities. So Edwin, it's all yours. Please go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Dr. Dane. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, as Dr. Dane presented me or introduced me, I am Edwin Garces. I am graduated at Engineering Technology Management at PSU. So Dr. Dane was my academic advisor. I am going to present my thesis project, which is evaluating R&D projects in regulated utilities, the case of power transmission utilities. A little bit about me. I have my PhD, as I indicated. I gained in in the engineering management at Portland State, and also I have my master's in engineering and technology management and in economics at PSU too. I have gained 2 bachelor's degrees, one in electrical engineering and the other one in economics in Peru, my country. And my professional experience, I have been working in what is quantitative analysis in general. I have experience in what is business intelligence analyst in some mobile technologies company. And I have been working also with Dr. Dane as a graduate assistant in many projects at PSU. Projects like Bonneville Power Administrations, focusing on road mapping mainly. And also I have been teaching assistant at PSU in many classes like technology management, decision making, R&D management, etc. with Dr. Dane. I have some experience at Portland Community College. I have been intern over there and teaching what is macroeconomics classes. And I have been also some experience in Peru working with as a specialist, rate specialist, financial analyst, and researcher in the quantitative area in the distribution utility company, electrical companies, and also as work as a manager in projects and consultant in the Department of Education in Peru. This was a project in conclusion of International Development Bank, Spain, and the government of Peru, focusing on restructuring technical education. And my publications, as you can see, there is some publications, mainly focusing on the area of technology. I have been focused on what is quantitative analysis in the electrical area, but I have also some publications in the area of health or others like smart roofing or robotics. And also I have some chapter books. All of these publications, I work with Dr. Dane. The agenda for today is that I will start with the introduction, where I can show you the importance of analyzing the sector, the transmission sector in the electricity area, and also the problems. I will specify the objectives and the gap analysis that I made, and explain what are the methodology and the model that I formulated. At the end, I will analyze those results. So I will back to the title of the thesis to start analyzing what's exactly what I made. What is the motivation of this work? So first of all, the motivation is that there are many, all of the things has to be analyzed considering all the aspects. In other words, make a holistic approach. It's not just considering one element like a mainly is made, for example, considering economical aspects, but also there are other factors affecting our decisions. So one of the main area that I am analyzing this is in the project evaluation, but the specific projects are R&D projects which are associated with uncertainties because we lack of data. At the same time, is where is the project evaluated? And they have considered the regulated utilities. Those utilities are special because they are under control of government. the regulation that are protecting to the customers, and the environment of the market is totally different than markets in perfect competition. And the case application is a very important representative organization in this area of regulated utilities. It's in the power transmission utilities. As you can see here in the figure, the industry of electricity can be divided in 3 different areas: it's generation, transmission, and distribution. What I am focusing on in transmission, where the system has been working as a natural monopoly. Only one company serving the area. Different than the generation that changed in 1978 with PURPA regulations, where it's established or formulated some type of competitions. And in distribution too, there is a kind of different companies can be served at different areas too. So that's why I am focusing on transmission. That's one aspect of that. There are 2 types of main problems that I have been seeing in this area. One is about the transmission sector, and the other one is associated with the methodologies to use for evaluating R&D projects. And the importance of these transmission sectors, analyzing these transmission sectors, is focusing on the R&D importance, because the companies have to adapt and compete in the market. At the same time, this project needs to consider all the criteria because regulations, like economical, social, environmental, and regulatory, those conditions can change. That requires a high capital for them, and the impact will be high. And the decisions can be sometimes not be consistent and not efficient. There are in the market, as I mentioned before, 2 types of companies. In the business model structure, it can be divided in investors-owned utilities or utilities for profit, and not profit owner models or utilities. As we can see here, both the values propositions are very similar, except that we have more elements when we talk about non-profit organizations. So we have to integrate all of the aspects into the model. As we can see here too, also the business models regarding what is vertically integrated utilities or horizontally integrated utilities are very showing the importance of how is the role of the transmission utilities. The ownership can be divided in the different models, but it will depend how the transmission is working or integrated to the market. So that's why I am focusing on the transmission, the importance of that. As I mentioned before, there are 2 types of problems. One is in the power sector. And the reason is because analyzing R&D projects is in regulated companies in the area of public sector is different than analyzing R&D projects in a perfect competitive market. There are many types of problems, like we have to invest large capital, and also there are integrated the aspect like a regulation and market. These regulations can change, can adapt, so the companies have to adapt to that regulations. At the same time, those regulations are different in each state. In the US, we have the FERC, which is the FERC and the NERC, which are federal too. So there are changes in the regulations in the US, for example, in the federal level and the state level. And as I said, there are factors associated with those, so we have to consider all of them. The other type of problem is associated with the methods in the transmission power sector. Usually the organization, these type of organizations are competing in the long run. And they are just focusing on the individual projects, analysis or evaluating the projects individually, and not in the entire portfolio. That is associated with a lot of uncertainties, and also associated with a lack of experience from the expertise, since that is a new technology. At the same time, there are other aspects, like, for example, companies, organizations are focusing only in financial evaluation methods, which requires a long-run planning, and that requires a lot of assumptions. And therefore, there will be or exist many uncertainties at the same time. So there are many methods about that, but also there are very complex methods to evaluate. The other aspect is that those methods does not consider all the factors again. Therefore, since there are many factors associated with the R&D evaluation in this type of utilities, I have made some assessment of what factors affecting that, what kind of criteria or sub-criteria can affect that. Initially, what I found the most common is that there are 5 different criteria and 18 sub-criteria. This has been will be used, or I used that in the first version of my hierarchical decision model that I will show you later. Those are the criteria, the difference of the criteria associated with the type of organization. For example, if we analyze R&D in general, we focus always on technology merits, the economical benefits, the project management in general, the risks of the project, the market, the strategic factors associated with the project, and the actors. However, when we point in something more specific, like a no-profit or regulated, appears some different factors like economic or social or technical too. But for example, we consider here the environmental or regulatory with the acceptance of stakeholders. So if we integrate those all aspects in the power transmission utilities, we can see here that the technical and regulatory aspects has been added, focusing also on reliability. And that is one of the aspects very important, because at the end, I have some conclusions about this aspect. And also, in the power transmission, there are considered what is the regional economic part. What are the gaps? If we consider the 4 different aspects, one is the R&D projects. The second thing is that no profit, and also the regulated organization. And in the power industry, basically, we don't have any study for evaluating R&D projects. If we analyze also the methodologies in the area of R&D investments, in the power industry, there is a complete lack of research analysis. Therefore, I identified 3 main gaps. The first gap is associated with what is the lack of considering the factors aligning with the objectives of the company or strategic aspects. So the first gap is the lack of integration of all main factors related to strategies, utility objectives, and market conditions. The second gap actually is associated with the lack of incorporating all the aspects, all the factors in evaluating the R&D projects. So therefore, there is a lack of holistic and complete approach. My third gap is associated with the case study. There is a complete lack in the area of electrical transmission sector. I couldn't find too many papers exactly doing, considering all the factors. Therefore, if we have the gaps that I mentioned, will make my research goal, which is to develop a model to select R&D projects based on a holistic approach aligned to strategic utility objectives and market conditions in the electrical transmission sector. Reaching those goals, I will answer questions, for example, of what are the factors associated with the R&D project in this area? What are the levels or weights in that criteria, sub-criteria considering here? And how are the changes of these criteria impact on the R&D project selections? Basically doing the sensitivity analysis. This is my research approach. The methodology that I'm using is basically based on hierarchical decision model. I have made, as I mentioned before, a literature review as a phase 1 to identify the factors, gaps, etc. So the phase 2 is developing the model, which is identify the mission, identify the criteria and sub-criteria, and identify the alternatives for the case study. Also, after having the model, it needs to be validated by experts. It needs to be quantified by experts. And at the end, there is a analysis of the results. Why I am using multi-criteria decision model in the specific case of hierarchical decision model. One important thing is that I can integrate all the aspects. I can make a holistic analysis. The second thing is that there are all of the factors need to be analyzed and not isolated like specific things like economical things. If not, all the factors need to be in the model in order to capture the effects of every aspect affecting to our decisions. At the same time, those aspects can be quantitative or qualitative aspects, and the HDM is capable to use them. Another important thing is the comparing with other type of tools. Statistical calculations and assumptions are used in what is financial methods, for example. In this case, hierarchical decision model eliminates this problem. And also, another important thing to consider here is that besides considering the main factors of the organization, etc., we are considering also that HDM is a quantitative method that prevents internal disagreements among decision makers, and performs as an unbiased process. Where I am focusing, in what area I am focusing exactly the analysis. This is the project life cycle in this type of utilities. I am focusing basically in what is the evaluation, selection, and prioritization. This type of project, this type of analysis works complementing what is cost-benefit analysis or net present value. So the first stage is formulating the model. As I mentioned before, this is from the literature review. Those are the criteria and sub-criteria. And that make I obtained the first version of the model with 5 criteria and 19 sub-criteria in total. However, after obtaining that, I made what is a theoretical analysis. In other words, I identify what theories are associated with any aspect in this type of models, in this type of R&D evaluation projects in regulated utilities. And they have added theories, and they have added a better or more elements that make my model better, more consistent. As we can see here, those theories are associated with market structure, regulation, innovation, and environment. If we have, for example, in the area of electrical sector, three different components, stakeholders. One is the utilities, the regulation government, and the customers are in the middle. If we start analyzing these R&D projects, we are talking about innovation, which companies will make for obtaining a return. That is where the government enters, and there is the regulated area of the type of technologies. They evaluate if that is useful or it can be used. Therefore, there are two different type of analysis here. Is that is allowance or disallowance. If that is allowance, they allow some cost recovery in that. So that's how the government works in that type of technologies. So therefore, I identify, for example, aspects like economical aspects that the regulation will be in the revenue and the price, and the technical aspects. And also in the technical things are, for example, the service standards, the quality and quantity of the service. As I mentioned before, those are the entities in the federal aspect that first regulated prices, NERC regulated quality of the service, and there are also utility commissions in each state. And the main theories associated with this, the market structure are associated with natural monopoly theory, the economic of quality. The regulations are associated with two different models or theories, which is the public interest theory and interest group theory. Innovation, that's associated, for example, the Schumpeterian innovation and the dynamic natural monopolies. If we talk about environment, we always need to take this theory in account, which is the Pigovian tax. There is these other theories, but this is one of the most important. Analyzing this will make my model more consistent. So we have in total 5 criteria and 22 sub-criteria. At the end, this model is very consistent and will change just a little bit after experts evaluated that. So who are going to evaluate, or who evaluated my project were experts. Those experts were distributed in different panels. They have 4 panels, and they basically validated the model and quantified the model. The number of participants you can see here. And also I use 4 different research instruments, in this case surveys, using Qualtrics at Portland State University. An important thing to mention here is how to evaluate the answers of these experts. So I have considered the inconsistency, experts inconsistency, and group disagreements, both of them under the 10% for all the criteria and for all the sub-criteria. How I identify the experts is very important. I identify using the snowballing method and using some documents like a technology roadmap, etc. And also I have used a social network analysis. The social network analysis will give me the main actors in that area, but mostly associated with the academic area. So I have considered the industry experts and also the academia experts that publish papers, journals, etc. one of the most important aspects to consider here is balancing experts. So I have two different areas. I have considered the technical aspects and not technical aspects. And also I have considered the type of organizations. My experts come from the academia, in total 12. From BPA, which I am analyzing Bonneville, is 9. The regulated utility, other regulated utility, 4. I have considered also national labs in the US, the private sector transmission. And there are here, for example, the regional event organizations that exist in every state. The RTOs, that are regional transmission organizations that are very close to BPA. So therefore, this type of project, this type of model can be also applicable in that type of organizations. At the same time, I have considering where the experts are from. And for sure, there are most of them from the US, and countries like Spain, Netherlands, and Sweden has been considered. And one important thing is that those countries I validated because they have the similar economic and political characteristics than the US. And this is the distribution of the experts. As you can see here is the model validation and the model quantification. The number of the experts, always the most of the experts concentration were in the criteria, also for the model validation and for the model quantification. And those are the results for the validation. In general, I have used that validated in more than 67% of agreement. So all of the criteria were validated with more than 80%. The results of sub-criteria validation. All of the sub-criteria were validated, all of the 22 sub-criteria, except what is in the economical aspect, in cost, time, process improvement. Only 50% accepted that, so I dropped the variable. But also there were a couple other 2 items that experts suggested to integrate, and I validated too. At the end, this is the model that I have, integrating those new elements and dropping what they suggested to drop. And this is the model or final model validated until the level 3, with in total 24 sub-criteria and 5 criteria. Therefore, after having this model, I need to consider what are the alternatives. And that is the research application. I focus on the Northwest in the US. As I said, I am focusing on the Bonneville Power Administration, BPA. And this Bonneville Power Administration works in the Northwest in the US, and is one of the main transmission utilities in the US. The projects that I am evaluating are focusing on what is power transmission technologies. As you can see here, those are the characteristics of the projects. That's focusing on reliability and stability. Basically, they are monitoring systems and prevention of natural disasters, for example. I consider that the project needs to have at least 12 months. And also the focus of the project, as I said, in transmission, and which corresponds to transformers and lines. So since I have many projects, one of the things is clustering the projects to evaluate homogeneous and comparable projects. So I have in total 18 projects at BPA, and I cluster them, and it results in clusters of 4 or 5 different projects. I use a hierarchical clustering, and I consider the main categories like a derivable of the projects, what impacts on the system components, how are the impacts on the system functions, and if there is a collaboration with other organizations. So the results of these clusters analysis was that I selected in total 6 different clusters, but I choose the third one, which I show here, and those are 4 different TIP, Technology Innovation Projects, which is the terminology that Bonneville Power Administration used for the R&D projects. So this is a better, I think, description of the project that they found. There are 4 projects, and we can categorize the first 2 projects focusing on reducing the risk of the system. One is combining the horizontal and vertical if there is a seismic event, and the other one is basically making an assessment of the risk problems in the system. The other 2 alternatives are focusing basically in what is the performance of the transformers. One is improving the bushing in the transformers, and the other one is basically using aircraft systems in order to just optimize the workflows and automatization of tools. I consider also the deliverables of the projects. I have considered also what are the different type of investment levels. And as you can see here, there are many levels. The spans of the project, more than 12 months. And for sure, focusing all of them in the transmission. This is the final model that needs to be quantified. We have here the criteria and sub-criteria and the practical application part, which are the what type of projects or evaluating projects for different projects. The results of the quantification. As I mentioned before, I considered the voice of the experts. It was considered the inconsistency and disagreement and work at less than 10%. And the criteria, the highest weight that the experts gave was to the external and regulation and environmental criterion, 27%, as it was expected. Second of all, it was an economical aspect. If we see the quantification on the sub-criteria, also the economical aspect is focusing on what is the acceptance of the project. Another aspect is to consider here is that in the sub-criteria quantification, the technical or the most important sub-criterion was the technical success. In the market is the time to the market or system planning. And in the economical aspect, the value added to the target product. That is the summary of the relative weights of the model. The most important thing here is that if you can see the numbers of the weights in the criteria are very close, except the external regulation and environmental criterion, which is 27%, comparing the 16, 15, or 19%, or even economic, which is 23. The other important aspect to mention here is that, as I mentioned, there are 2 types of categories of projects. And we can divide the first 2, which are associated with the risk analysis, with very, very similar weights, 28% and 27%. And the other group which are focusing on the performance, which has 22% and 23%. So experts divided these naturally. The sensitivity analysis of the results. What will happen with my results in the project when I change the criteria values to extremes. For example, I can consider it to a very high weight to the technical part, minimizing the other weights. And for the 5 criteria. The main result of this is that, again, the effects of these changes affect depending on what type of project is that. The first 2 projects that I mentioned that's associated with the risk, minimizing the risk, exchange the position of 1 to 2, or in this case, 1 to 2 or 2 to 1. And if we talk about the other effect is the other 2 projects which are associated with the performance of the system that change between them. So there is no a change between the project, for example, 4 to the project 1. If not, that is divided between different projects. Another important aspect to consider here is that even we make that kind of huge changes in the criterion, the effects in the alternatives are very low. And the reason is because the criteria, the values, the weight values of the alternatives are very close. It needs to be separated significantly between the weights in the alternatives to have big effects from changes in the criteria. After I make the analysis, I send back the results, the analysis of my project to the experts. In total, 12 experts answer my questionnaire, and I ask if that models, that results correspond to their expectations. All of them said that yes, it was that what they were expecting. What are the main contributions of my thesis? One of the main contributions is identifying the criteria and sub-criteria in this type of utilities. As I said, this type of utilities are different than considering other companies in the competitive market. Another important aspect is that I have made a holistic approach, and it can be, the model can be applicable not only in the transmission sector, if not in other regulated entities. At the same time, this model incorporates all the elements, theoretical elements, by the analysis that I made, making the model more consistent. And that's why we can apply in different type of companies. The generalization of the model also is the main contribution, since I have balanced the experts from many areas, from many countries, from many type of organizations. And this one with the theoretical analysis make that the model can be generalized easily. As any study, this analysis has some limitations. The first limitation is that itself, using these models, will not conclude in invest or not invest in a project. This analysis can work together with other type of tools like a net present value or cost-benefit analysis ratio. Another important aspect to consider here is that we have to consider the moment of analysis of this model. If that is time sensitive, as the regulation can change, different criteria or sub-criteria could also be modified. So it has to be evaluated. The model needs to be validated again if there is any change during the time. And finally, this model also is very known that it's subjective, since we are considering the expert's voice. However, those are minimized when we use the hierarchical decision models, when we balance the voice of them. What are the main conclusions? The main conclusions the evaluation of R&D projects in regulated organizations correspond to different criteria and sub-criteria that aligns to the objective and market conditions where the company is located. Other aspect to conclude is that regulatory things play one of the most important role in this type of projects. Second one is the economical aspect and importance with the value added. And also there exists other things like, for example, in the technical area or the regulation area, focusing on the reliability. That's what I mentioned in the beginning. The reliability is one of the aspects that focus or impact on this type of projects. And also we have to consider mainly the technical success, the time to the market, the strategic fit, and other sub-criteria that has highest values too. I mean, we have to consider all, but those are the main criteria or sub-criteria. And the other conclusion is that the changes in the weights in criteria does not affect significantly to the weights of the alternatives. It has to, the alternatives weights needs to be totally different in order to perceive more changes. And that's all my presentation. If there is any questions or comments, thank you.
Thank you so much, Edwin. Are there any questions?
Dr. Daim, just a quick question. What with you know, studying how to do the R&D study, did they actually come up with any project that had a better transmission to avoid the losses in the transmission lines from the generation source to the end use?
In the 18 projects that I saw, I think there are some projects. I mean, every year, Bonneville changed the portfolio of projects. I don't remember exactly what projects were in the 18, but probably is considered that. I mean, losses is a big issue in the transmission area. And that's actually the aircraft, for example, is used in order to ensure the performance of the transmission lines.
Thank you so much. So I'm gonna stop the recording now, and thank you, Edwin, for joining us today.
Thank you.